This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Ateli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. South Korea's defense minister grilled in parliament over North Korea's nuclear arsenal, scaled back drills and the U.S. alliance as Pyongyang launches fresh suspected ballistic missiles. Now, China's top diplomat meets South Korea's president in Seoul, urging faster progress on a free trade deal as both sides seek closer cultural and economic ties. Also, Taiwan eyes record defense spending next year, up 18% to $35 billion. But with the opposition controlling parliament, winning approval could be a battle. Now, also, China Evergrande's founder jailed for life nearly 5 years after the collapse of the world's most indebted property developer sent shockwaves through Asia's largest economy. Also ahead, just how close are we to having robots at home that can complete most tasks through voice or text commands? Well, the founder of Chinese humanoid robot firm Unitree believes it's just a few years away, saying that the industry is near a so-called ChatGPT moment. And fancy donning a spacesuit and pretending you've landed on Mars? Well, you can do that in China. Space exploration has become a collective cultural experience as the country prepares to send astronauts to the moon and beyond. South Korea's military says North Korea has launched around 10 short-range ballistic missiles towards the East Sea. Now, Japan said that the projectiles landed outside of its exclusive economic zone. Seoul has called for an immediate halt to provocations as the Security Council convenes over the latest launch. The missiles were fired as South Korea and the U.S. hold their annual joint military drills. The exercises have been shortened following U.S. President Donald Trump's order to substantially reduce them. CNA's senior correspondent Lee Jae-myung has the details.
South Korea's lawmakers on the Defense Committee grilled Defense Minister Wang Yi on North Korea's nuclear arsenal, after U.S. President Donald Trump said on Wednesday that Pyongyang has 57 very powerful nuclear weapons. Asked for South Korea's estimate, the minister gave a number, but stopped short of confirming it as the military's own official assessment.
북한 핵무기 숫자를 보통 우리가 80개에서 120개 정도로 말씀을 했다고 제가 말씀을 드렸는데 이것은 국내의 연구기관에 대한 그 민간 연구기관에 대한 평가의 내용인 것이고요. 우리 군 당국에서는 이게 어떻게 평가하는지에 관해서는 구체적으로 제가 지금 이 자리에서 말씀드리는 건 상당히 제한적입니다.
But the bigger confrontation between opposition lawmakers and the minister was over U.S.-South Korea alliance. Mr. An described it as being stronger than ever, even as Seoul was not told in advance of America's decision to shorten ongoing joint military drills.
저도 군 생활을 38년 했습니다. 미국 관련된 한미동맹 일을 계속해 왔어요. 지금과 같이 소통 안 되는 적이 없어요. 그런데 어떻게 그런 이야기를 장관이 할 수 있습니까?
글쎄요.
예를 들어서 이야기할게요. 지금 훈련 중에 있는 UFS 훈련을 축소한다고 발표했고 받아들였어요. 지금까지 한미연합훈련 중에 훈련을 축소한 적이 있습니까? 없죠.
Minister An said even U.S. officials did not know about the decision beforehand, adding that Seoul began working-level consultations with Washington only after President Trump posted on social media. Meanwhile, South Korean President Lee Jae Myung said he respected Trump's decision to scale back exercises, saying he hopes it leads to renewed dialogue with Pyongyang. Trump is seeking to revive engagement with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and said on Wednesday that he plans to meet him later this year. A South Korean foreign ministry spokesman said at a briefing on Thursday that Seoul hopes Pyongyang will respond positively to these measures.
정부는 페이스메이커이자 한반도 평화의 당사자로서 한미 간 긴밀한 공조하에 북미 대화 재개와 한반도 평화를 위해 적극적인 노력을 경주해 나갈 것입니다.
But here in Seoul, where residents were taking part in an annual civil defense exercise, some expressed concern about what scaling back military exercises could mean for security.
이번에 훈련은 굉장히 중요한 건데 그걸 갖다가 이 시점에서 그렇게 하면 안 된다고 보고 저희도 그걸 심각하게 생각하고 대응해야 된다고 생각합니다.
저희 안보에 위협이 되지 않을까 약간은 그런 생각도 들기는 하고요. 그래서 이런 뭐 훈련이라든지 뭐 한미 관계라든지 뭐 이런 것들은 예전처럼 잘 유지됐으면.
South Korea holds these civil defense drills every year, bringing together local authorities, police, and the military to prepare for possible attacks. Im Yeon-suk, CNA, Seoul.
Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi calling for closer ties with South Korea in a meeting with President Lee Jae Myung in Seoul. Mr. Wang wants to speed up free trade talks, while President Yi says that the two countries should become mutually beneficial and complementary partners. Mr. Wang also raised the possibility of a leaders' summit at the APEC gathering in Shenzhen in November. Seoul is looking to Beijing to help bring a frosty Pyongyang back to dialogue. Mr. Wang says that China hopes to see the two Koreas move towards peaceful coexistence.
作为半岛的最重要的邻国，中方将会为半岛的和平稳定继续发挥建设性的作用，做出我们的应尽的努力。
And for the latest, let's bring in CNA correspondent Deborah Wong, who is joining us live from Shenzhen. So, Deb, you've been tracking this development very closely. Tell us, first up, what has China gained from this trip? And also, where do ties with Seoul go from here?
I think it's quite clear that we are seeing a continued high-level exchange between the two countries, and that signals warming ties as both sides are potentially planning a leaders' summit in Shenzhen right here in November later this year. And it really comes as both sides have also put in the work to thaw the kind of frosty relations we've seen since the THAAD incident in 2016, which of course led to Chinese restrictions on South Korean exports in business and culture and media tourism as well. So any step right now to improve economic ties is very important. And it's also against this backdrop that Mr. Wang has urged South Korea to maintain a very friendly relationship and policy towards China. And aside from that, he has also urged South Korea to maintain and pursue relationships with both China and the U.S. in parallel without conflict. But of course, this statement, it could be tricky because South Korea enjoys a strategic relationship with the U.S. I did speak to a Chinese foreign policy expert, Dr. Jae Chu, who's currently based in Seoul, for some insights. Have a listen.
China has been looking for opportunities to really cooperate with South Korea, with a particular focus on industries instead of economic and trade. They're looking for practical opportunities for practical cooperation in the practical fields. But with the global supply chain that is being led by the United States, it marginalized Korea's opportunity to materialize China's wishful list.
So in terms of practical cooperation, just for context, it actually builds this meeting that Mr. Wang and Mr. Lee had built on an earlier meeting that President Lee had with President Xi in January this year. And it was a meeting that was pretty fruitful because they decided to cooperate on the digital economy, transportation, as well as tech. But on the security front, that also took precedence during this trip. But President Lee had asked Mr. Wang to continue monitoring the security situation on the Korean peninsula. We understand that earlier during the trip, Mr. Wang was asked by South Korean reporters on whether China would facilitate a potential summit between the U.S. and North Korea regarding security. He says that China supports peace, but he's going to be leaving this to the relevant parties, meaning U.S. and North Korea, to decide, and that the U.S. should change its hostile stance towards North Korea as a start. Let's hear from Dr. Jae Chu again.
because the precedents in 2018 and 2019 demonstrates that the United States and North Korea cannot facilitate the dialogue between themselves without outside help. If the United States really wants to have a talk with North Korea, I think North Korea has to have a sense of assurance and security and guarantees coming from third party.
So Mr. Wang's response here very clearly signals that China is not keen to play a direct intermediary role at this point. Beyond any rhetoric, it will not be taking any physical action, to bring North Korea to the negotiation table. But quite clearly, there is some sort of intervention that needs to be made before any progress can be seen.
And Deborah, it doesn't stop here for Foreign Minister Wang Yi. He's going to be spending some 7 hours or so in the air, traveling to Indonesia next. Tell us, what does that signal in terms of China's diplomatic priorities in the region right now?
So Mr. Wang's back-to-back meetings do signal that China is quite keen to pursue, deeper regional ties in South Korea and Indonesia, but more broadly in the global south as well as in the APEC countries. In Indonesia, we understand that Mr. Wang will be co-chairing meetings on security and the economy and defense as well. He's also going to be taking part in, discussions with defense ministers. Now, this visit, it's quite notable because it also comes a week after Indonesia took part in Chinese PLA naval drills just off the coast of Taiwan. And it also happened during Taiwan's own military drills, the Hangguang exercises. And it's an episode that attracted quite a number of criticism towards Indonesia because it does highlight the delicate balance that regional powers have to play when they consider defense ties with China. And it also draws back to the question of how they plan to balance ties as they engage both China and the U.S. So Mr. Wang's engagements on these two fronts could also be shaping, political and economic alignments ahead of APEC in Shenzhen in November. In fact, Beijing has been promoting APEC in its engagements with other leaders, saying that APEC is going to be a platform for open trade, open economy, multilateral cooperation. And these are themes that are central to its diplomatic messaging. It's also central to, the messaging that they're bringing to U.S.-China trade talks. So we can expect similar tones as we look forward to a Trump-Xi meeting in September and potentially one more in APEC in November. But ultimately, when we look at everything together, the messaging from Beijing is that it wants to be seen not just as an economic power, but also as a central player in setting the stage for regional trade, security, and diplomacy in Asia. Atali.
Well, thanks for unpacking China's diplomacy in the region. CNA correspondent Deborah Wong reporting to us live from Shenzhen. Now, Taiwan is looking at its largest ever defense budget. The government has submitted its plans for 2027 as tensions with China show no sign of easing. CNA's senior correspondent Victoria Jen reports from Taipei.
Taiwan's annual defense spending could surpass 1 trillion Taiwan dollars for the first time in history. The cabinet has approved a 2027 budget of 1.12 trillion NT, or around 35 billion US dollars, to be allocated for defense of the island. That's about 18% higher than this year. The government here says the spending is about defense and deterrence.
国防整体的预算破兆，达到1兆1225亿，也维持了3%的 GDP。这代表着我们有决心捍卫国家安全，也有能力投资和平。
The government says most of the money will go to what it calls asymmetric weapons, including drones, mobile anti-ship missiles, and a new air defense system, T-Dome. The aim, officials say, is to make any attack too costly to attempt. This increase in defense spending is happening as tensions rise further across the Taiwan Strait. Beijing regards Taiwan as part of its territory and has not ruled out using force to bring it under control. Taipei rejects that claim. And earlier this week, China's state-run media published a commentary addressing Taiwan. It called the island's reunification with the mainland a historical task that must be fulfilled in the process of China's current national rejuvenation, and that the Taiwan question cannot be passed down from one generation to the next. At the same time, there's also been pressure from Washington, which has urged Taipei, like its European partners, to spend more on its own defense. Taiwan's President William Lai says he agrees and has set a target of 5% of GDP by 2030. This landmark is not guaranteed. It still has to pass a parliament controlled by the opposition, which say they support defense spending, but not what they see as a blank check. Just months ago, they cut an earlier defense package by a third and removed funding for locally made drones. So for now, the headline figure is a proposal. How much of it survives is now up to Taiwan's lawmakers. Victoria Jen, CNA, Taipei.
Well, up next, we've got business news. A flash memory giant SK Hynix paying out employee bonuses in a mixture of stock and cash in a preliminary agreement reached with the union. Plus, Shanghai easing some property policies to shore up demand for housing amid still sluggish consumer spending. Hello again. You're watching East Asia Tonight, and you're just in time for business news with Roland. So, Roland, the big news today, the sentencing of Evergrande Group's founder, well, that's out today. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, Evergrande's failure 5 years ago came to embody an unfolding property sector crunch. Xi Jiayin's fate, though, unlikely to bring much consolation to Evergrande's domestic and foreign creditors. The founder of Chinese real estate developer Evergrande has been sentenced to life in prison for fraud. The court had ordered all of Xi Jiayin's personal property to be confiscated and fined the embattled property giant $1.3 billion. 5 other senior executives were dealt fines and prison terms ranging from 6 to 18 years. Troubles for the world's most indebted property developer began when the Chinese government cracked down on excessive borrowing in 2020. The firm defaulted in 2021 amid mounting debt. It has since failed to make good on most of its $300 billion in liabilities, in troubles emblematic of China's property sector woes that have long dragged on economic growth. Mr. Xi had not been seen in public since authorities detained him in 2023, following Evergrande's default. While China Evergrande was delisted about a year ago, shares of subsidiary Evergrande Property Services, well, it pared earlier gains to end the day up 2.4% after the announcement. China's financial hub, Shanghai, has eased some property policies in a bid to shore up demand. Residents will be able to withdraw savings from the Housing Provident Fund. That's a government program used to help people buy homes. The city will also allow buyers to withdraw their savings more frequently. The minimum down payment for a second home in Shanghai suburbs was also lowered to 15% from 20%. Temporary subsidies of up to $12,000 are available for those selling second-hand homes after buying new homes. Shanghai's measures comes after the central government's announcement yesterday on the mobilization of $1.6 trillion in a collective fund meant to boost housing-related consumption. The move coming after data showing the Chinese economy slowed further in the month of July, with consumption softening more than expected and nationwide home prices continuing to fall. South Korean chipmaker SK Hynix says it has reached a tentative deal over bonuses with its employees, following an AI boom that has sent its earnings soaring. This year, employees will receive 40% of their bonuses in cash and 40% in stock, which can be cashed out immediately. The remaining 20% will be paid in stock as deferred compensation. Now, they are reportedly said to be paid an average of $547,000. The agreement is subject to a vote by union members. This is unlike an all-cash payout that staff received last year. The deal also includes a 6.3% increase in base wages and a clause allowing the company to defer up to 3% of wages should it record losses. SK Hynix stocks jumping close to 13%. The share price had hit a record high in June on excitement over the AI boom before slumping on news that too much money is being spent with insufficient reward. Let's check on prices. SK Hynix gaining alongside Samsung, helping to lift the Kospi benchmark. The housing measures in China giving the Hang Seng Property Index a boost as well and help the benchmark equity indices stay in the green. Shares in Chinese tech giant Alibaba rose 1.6% before its results. Now, it topped estimates for revenue with a 9% jump to $40 billion for its first quarter. And that's with strong demand for its AI services, helping its cloud business, and a shopping festival helped boost sales for its core e-commerce unit. A day after a blockbuster stock market debut, Unitree shares trading more than 19% down, I should say, by the close, but still more than 4 times above its strike price. The humanoid maker's CEO says the industry could be 2 or 3 years away from a tipping point or a so-called ChatGPT moment.
快的话可能2到3年，慢的话5年或者10年的时间。就真正如果哪一天大家能看到，把一台机器人带到一个你的任意的一个陌生环境，带到你的家庭，它基本可以实现80%左右的任务。我觉得就差不多已经实现了具身证的确立时刻。这就是未来真正产业的一个临界的爆发点。
Mr. Wang was speaking at the ongoing World Robot Conference in Beijing. He focused on the next big challenge, not simply making robots faster or more agile, but getting them to adapt and work reliably in the real world. Mr. Wang says robots already perform very well in environments they've been specifically trained for, but the success rate can drop sharply when the surroundings or objects change. Now, solving that, he said, could bring the industry to a major turning point. It's also why Unitree hasn't rolled out its robots on a large scale yet.
简单来说，就是虽然目前我们机器人能做一些简单的装配了，但它的效率其实跟人比起来，还是比人还是要更低一些。然后另外的话，就是每次有一些新的任务过来的时候，要重新进行训练，这样的效率相对更低一点。所以我们还是希望把技术做到更加泛化能力更好的情况，再进行大规模推广。而且这是目前全球大家共同的一个最大的瓶颈。
Unitree has become one of the biggest names in China's fast-growing robotics industry. It recently unveiled its new Superman humanoid model, which the company says can jump 2 meters from a standing position and reach a top running speed of more than 12 meters per second, surpassing human records and, quote, breaking the limits of humanity. An industry report released at the conference today says the Chinese company shipped more than 40,000 humanoid robots in the first half of this year. That's a 97% of the global total. So what if the winner of the tech race isn't the country with the best tech, but the country that gets the most out of every dollar it spends? Now, the US may be inventing, but China has a manufacturing edge. Now, here's a robot that tells you quite a lot about the tech race between China and the US. Now, important breakthroughs behind modern 4-legged robots were actually developed by American researchers with US military funding. MIT's Mini Cheetah, for example, demonstrated technologies allowing robots to run, balance, and to recover from being pushed around. Now, much of that research was published openly. Unitree's founder, Wang Yi, cited that American research directly in his own university thesis. One of the MIT researchers involved told Reuters that Unitree's popular Go series robot was, quote, near identical in dimensions to the American design it was based on. So what did China actually add? Well, it turned it into a product that is manufactured quickly and cheaply. A Boston Dynamics Spot, when it was launched in 2020, was priced at $74,500. Fast forward to today, Unitree's consumer Go 2 robot dog sells for $1,600. Now, granted that Boston Dynamics Spot is an industrial-grade model, Go 2 is not, but the price difference illustrates how quickly Unitree has taken the technology down market. And it's not just about robots. Our Chinese tech firms are on track to spend less than a tenth of what American hyperscalers spent on AI data centers this year, according to Bloomberg Intelligence. And yet, Moonshot AI's Kimi K3 model performs at about 95% of Anthropic's Fable 5 on widely used benchmarks. The kicker, now it's priced about 70% lower per token. Alibaba released a model this month that reportedly ranks among the best in the world by some measures too. So, looking ahead, the uncomfortable question for Washington is whether protecting intellectual property is enough when the bigger competitive advantage may be the ability to manufacture. And that'll do it for Business Oteli.
Thanks so very much for that, Roland. Coming up next on East Asia Tonight, robots can play ping pong now, and industry leaders say you could soon tell them to even do household chores. Are possible within the next 3 years. How feasible is that? We check with an expert. You're watching East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. North Korea launches fresh suspected ballistic missiles. South Korea's defense minister is grilled in parliament over Pyongyang's nuclear arsenal and Seoul's scaled-back drills with the U.S. A China's top diplomat meets South Korea's president in Seoul, urging faster progress on a free trade deal as both sides seek closer economic and cultural ties. Plus, Taiwan eyes a record defense spending next year, up 18% to $35 billion. But with the opposition controlling parliament, winning approval could be an uphill battle. Fold laundry, play ping pong, or get emotional support. Well, China is offering a robotic reboot for things you would typically do yourself or call a friend for. Well, the country is making its case at the World Robot Conference in Beijing, where more than 3,000 products are on display. And it's not just the novelty, the utility of these machines in focus. Makers are trying to convince investors and consumers their bots are ready to move from the showroom to your living room, assisting with daily activities and household chores. Well, some robots are increasingly showcasing their athletic abilities and also being able to replace real-life companions. Other manufacturers are dialing down the hype, arguing that their true value lies in societal efficiency and broader commercial use. I'll take these bots from Xeroth and Lumos, for example. Their focus is practical factory automation. Intelligent gesture tracking and natural language processing are being developed so that robots can work side by side with people safely. And China is leading the world in humanoid robot manufacturing and deployment. President Xi Jinping has called for the mass production of these bots to help offset a shrinking workforce and support an aging population. Well, lots to unpack here this evening. So for more, let's bring in Georg Stieler, who's the Managing Director for Asia, Stieler Technology and Market Advisory. Well, thanks very much, Georg, for joining us this evening. So let's just kind of start with Wang Yi, which is Unitree's CEO's biggest claim, right? But basically, he's saying that we are about to have this ChatGPT moment in 2 or 3 years. And again, a reminder to our viewers, what that means is that a robot can enter an unfamiliar environment and complete roughly 80% of the task. And Georg, the thing is that you have previously been very, or rather cautious about this. So just tell us, put things in perspective for us. How realistic is this timeline?
I think these 80% are pretty realistic. When we look at the recent breakthroughs, just last night, we saw a new announcement from Generalist AI in San Francisco that, we might get within 2 to 3 years to 80% of reliability. But 80% is still not where you want a robot in an industrial setting to be. When we compare it with industrial robots in the automotive industry, clients want to be at 99.99% reliability. But for what you're just showing, intralogistics, it works pretty much good. Yeah, I think he was in his speech actually. It was in contrast to the hype we saw at the show and also around his IPO. I think it's a very serious assessment.
And also when, Wang Xingxing was talking, we saw earlier how passionate he was. But what then do you think Unitree needs to demonstrate for us to believe that, it is going to make that leap?
For Unitree has an interesting strategy because when you look how they started 9-10 years ago, with a very different design to value strategy than American labs like Boston Dynamics, who were at that time state of the art in quadrupeds. And Unitree, their first quadruped came at the cost of 1/77th of the Boston Dynamic equivalent. The comparison is not entirely fair. The Boston Dynamics Spot was a heavy-duty industrial grade robot, and the Unitree Go more developer platform. But still, Unitree showed that they can scale, that they find buyers for their robots. And I think at this stage of the industry, that was crucial. And then the next step will be, what will be the new markets for them? They were very open about that. The majority of their robots recently went into, we call it edutainment, research institutions, universities, R&D departments of corporations, and into entertainment. They need to find now slowly other applications, and that cannot only be data factories. But I think when you look at the numbers of Unitree, they're already less dependent on these state-run data factories than their major domestic competitors.
Yeah, and Georg, you have said before that the flow of robotics know-how has actually flipped from, Western and Japanese companies now teaching China to Chinese companies actually teaching the West. So tell us essentially what has driven that reversal, and what does it tell us in terms of where the real robotics expertise, who does it sit with now?
I think when you look at the traditional industrial robots, Japanese and European companies still have strength, but then this humanoid, it's a very new machine category, and there is no natural market for it yet. It is being created very strongly by government initiatives or incentives in China, and this is something very interesting because how do you scale the production of new products where there is no real demand yet, and also where the software is not ready yet? And this is where Chinese players, both on the OEM side and on the component side, are leading. And I have these conversations with companies that develop both in China and in the Western world. And what is very different now than compared to 5 years ago is that you have to calibrate yourself on the Chinese dimensions, scale, speed, cost. Otherwise, if you ignore that, you make from the first step on mistakes, which will be very expensive.
So I mean, that raises a bigger question of, U.S.-China competition. I mean, U.S. has all these AI giants, while China has the robotics manufacturing ecosystem going. So where do you see that decisive advantage emerging, and what could shift the balance?
I see the leading robot foundation models still in the US. There I see generalist AI and physical intelligence in the lead, maybe Google as well. But the question is, who will build then the intelligent robots that find buyers? And there, China, with its huge ecosystem for hardware, for rapid iteration, for scaling up, has a major advantage. And you probably heard about this FCC ban for new foreign robots in the US. It's going to be very difficult to create a supply chain and supplier ecosystem that is as capable as the Chinese
So perhaps the
environment that.
So perhaps the winner doesn't really need to build the so-called smartest robot first, because you've mentioned or suggested that actually with just good enough robots, rather than more sophisticated ones, that could be China's edge.
Yeah, the capabilities of the software still play a very big role. And there the race is very interesting, because you have, on the one hand, you have companies like generalist AI or physical intelligence. They're not very big. They have 50, or the others have slightly over 100 people. But they are on an extremely high level. And these are very young companies. They're younger than 3 years. And when you can say a company is, say, 12 months ahead, that's still a long period of time. On the other hand, let's see how this plays out once it comes to the commercialization. And we have, when we look at the WRC, we have also very skilled Chinese companies in that field. For example, X Square.
Right.
So I think the race is quite open.
Okay, well, Georg, that's a great place to leave it. I know that you could have done this entire interview in Mandarin as well, but I really appreciate your time and thoughts on this. I was just talking to Georg Stieler there, Managing Director for Asia with Stieler Technology and Market Advisory. Turning our attention to other news now, the Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative claims that China has expanded its maritime presence east of Taiwan. Now, the research group is saying that the increased activity followed an agreement between Japan and the Philippines. Both countries negotiated a maritime boundary in the area in early May. And the report added that Chinese law enforcement vessels carried out sustained patrols between June and August in waters where Tokyo and Manila have overlapping claims. China's operations have also included maritime surveys near Taiwan and questioned nearly 200 commercial vessels on their ports of call, as well as crew details. Now, the document suggests that Beijing may be seeking to establish a more permanent presence east of Taiwan and assert greater authority over the area. And it also warns China may be testing tactics relevant to a possible future blockade or quarantine of Taiwan. Beijing has previously criticized maritime talk between Japan and the Philippines, calling them a serious provocation against its One China principle. This comes as Tokyo and Manila strengthen their defense ties, with both countries taking more assertive positions on regional security. China has long-standing maritime disputes with Japan in the East China Sea and with the Philippines in the South China Sea. The report adds that the latest operations suggest that Beijing could now be seeking broader jurisdiction in waters it considers part of its near seas. Japan's defense minister is in India after visiting Australia as Tokyo looks to broaden its security partnerships in the region. Shinjiro Koizumi met with his counterpart Rajnath Singh in New Delhi. Both welcomed their strengthened defense cooperation. And without mentioning China, they reaffirmed their commitments to a free and open Indo-Pacific and expressed opposition to any unilateral actions to change the status quo. The trip is expected to focus on further deepening defense ties and advancing maritime security cooperation. Now, this visit builds on Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi's trip to the Indian capital just last month that saw both sides sign a slew of agreements worth more than $10 billion. Japan, India, Australia, and the US make up the so-called Quad nations, focusing on strategic cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. But actions and comments by the White House have raised questions among U.S. allies about Washington's security commitments in the region. This comes as President Donald Trump presses allies to take primary responsibility for their defense. 4 railway workers have been killed in Japan after being hit by a train north of Tokyo. The accident happened this morning at Shinkanumuna Station in Tochigi Prefecture. It involved a Speicher X Express train on the Tobu-Nikko line that connects Tokyo with Nikko, a popular tourist destination. Local media say the workers were clearing weeds from around the tracks. Emergency crews found 3 of them trapped beneath the train and another on the platform. All 4 were later confirmed dead. The train was carrying some 50 passengers. And one described hearing a loud rumbling noise before the express train came to a sudden stop. Japan has one of the world's safest railway systems, and authorities are investigating today's accident. Up next on East Asia Tonight, China betting big on Chongqing to drive development in its west. We look at how mega infrastructure and new economic links are transforming the futuristic metropolis. Plus, China's push into the cosmos is whipping a frenzy for space exploration, from tourist attractions to art and the movies. You may have come across viral videos of Chongqing in western China with its towering skyscrapers and trains that weave through a building. But the city's rise isn't by chance. It is, in fact, one of the biggest beneficiaries of China's Great Western Development Strategy. Now, Beijing's multi-billion-dollar effort to transform the country's interior. Well, CNA's weekly current affairs program, Insight, explores what's behind this ambitious push.
You look at the spaceship-looking building behind me, that's going to be another luxury shopping mall by 2027, and it's going to be the new Central Mix City. The name Central is also inspired by the Hong Kong Central District, and the investors who built this are from Hong Kong.
At 18, Jackson Liu left Chongqing to study in Canada, where he stayed for 6 years. Then, the pandemic brought him back home, where he now runs a tour agency.
When I came back, the city felt different again. The city felt strange, yet familiar. The city obviously have developed a lot more overall. The Raffles City Chongqing completed its construction in 2019, and it was a huge investment for about 24 billion RMB. The original design language of this building is like a sailing ship, and a sail signifies something greater, something, good for this city.
Chongqing lies here, in the southwestern part of China, on the upper reaches of the Yangtze River. Post-pandemic, it's one of China's fastest-growing cities, posting an average GDP expansion of 5.6% between 2021 and 2025. And the southwestern metropolis hasn't stopped building. The Chongqing East Railway Station is the city's latest addition, unveiled last year.
This is not just another new station. This is the world's biggest railway station. Once the high-speed railway networks are connected to the station in the coming years, this will be another major hub that connects Western China to the east.
Once fully operational, a train ride to Beijing or Shanghai will only take 6 hours, half the time it takes now.
That sort of highlights the importance of the new Chongqing East Railway Station because it connects to the Yangtze River Railway corridor all the way to Wuhan, to Hefei, and to Shanghai. Yeah, which is very important. Yeah, but that's not the full story. The station is also connected to Xi'an in the north and to Guiyang in the south. That means that Chongqing is well connected right now by high-speed rail with all directions.
This now makes Chongqing, a landlocked municipality deep in China's interior, the center of the country's rail network. It's all part of Beijing's long-term strategy, a push to develop the country's west. For the last 4 decades, the country's prosperity was anchored in its eastern coast.
产业布局呢，吸引外国投资呢，也是在沿海地区。因为整个世界上90%的这个贸易物流都是在海上进行，所以因为这个原因呢，所以产业也是在沿海地区布局。但是呢，内陆地区呢就普遍落后，他们资源丰富，经济没有发展起来，基础设施也比较落后。
By the late 1990s, Beijing judged that this imbalance had become too great. The Great Western Development Strategy was launched in 2000 to narrow the gap between China's prosperous coast and its poorer western regions. This accelerated in the 2010s.
So I would say the real turning point was 2012 when President Xi Jinping took over office, and you can sense this real leaning towards the West when it comes to infrastructure building, prioritized loans, and policy support.
The Great Western Development Strategy concentrates investment in a handful of regional growth centers with the expectation that their development will benefit surrounding areas. In 2020, Beijing launched the Chengdu-Chongqing Economic Circle, or CCEC, which later became a central pillar of the 14th Five-Year Plan. Today, the CCEC is widely regarded as China's fourth major growth pole, alongside the Yangtze River Delta, the Greater Bay Area, and the Beijing-Tianjin-Hebei region.
What makes the CCEC quite unique is that it is the only city cluster in southwest or the entire western China. So that makes it unique and very, very important.
So can China's West deliver the next phase of the country's growth? Well, if you want to find out more, do catch the Insight episode, China's Westward Push, tonight at 9 p.m. Singapore, Hong Kong time, right here on CNA. And of course, you can always catch up on CNA Video on Demand or CNA Insider's YouTube page. Now, China's space race is no longer playing out only at launch sites and inside laboratories. It's increasingly becoming a public spectacle and even a tourist attraction. Here's a look at how Beijing is bringing its ambitions in space closer to people on the ground.
China's space launches were once highly classified in remote deserts. Now they've increasingly been open to public viewing amid a space race with the United States. On a sweltering night earlier this month, thousands flocked to the beaches around the Wenchang space launch site.
说不定我觉得过不了10几20年，我们自己的那个像马斯克那样子，我们也可以移居那火星，说不定啊。
And shortly after 8 p.m., the Long March 7A rocket blasted off. Though moments later, the uncrewed rocket turned into a ball of fire mid-air. Chinese state media confirmed an unforeseen blast a few hours afterwards. But many appeared unaware of what had happened as the fiery spectacle sent the beach crowd into a frenzy. Rocket launches have become both showcases of China's space ambitions and holiday experiences, even when space missions don't always go as planned. In northern Inner Mongolia, black volcanic rock formations have been turned into a Mars simulator. Visitors rent spacesuit costumes to pose against the backdrop of the barren terrain.
正好借用假期的时间，然后来到这边火山的区域来感受一下登太空的感觉。
Since launching its first rocket in 1960, China's space program has advanced through a series of milestones. The country plans a crewed mission landing by 2030, followed by a crewed mission to Mars.
I hope you've enjoyed this Thursday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at CNA.Asia and look us up. We're on all the socials, Facebook, YouTube, X. On that note, it's time to wrap things up, and I'll see you again tomorrow.